Hello and welcome to the Inspiring Women Wales podcast brought to you by NatWest Cymru and the University of South Wales. I'm Gemma Casey, NatWest Cymru's Ecosystem Manager for Wales. More women than ever are starting new businesses, and for the first time, women are starting businesses at a faster rate than men. That's great news, but we also know that male-led businesses are far more likely to scale up. And the COVID-19 pandemic was particularly brutal for women, with female entrepreneurs spending twice as long on caring responsibilities as their male counterparts. And 3/4 saying they found managing their businesses stressful during the pandemic. With this podcast, we aim to help women tackle these issues and more as they start and scale their businesses. We talk to brilliant female founders of Welsh businesses who have faced the challenges of business life head on. With me for this episode is Lianne Weaver, founder of Beam Development and Training. Hi, Lianne.
Hi, Gemma. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Lianne, tell me a little bit about Beam Development and Training.
Okay, so I started Beam actually in 2014, and it originally started as a therapy company. So I qualified in lots of different holistic therapies to begin with, and then talking therapies as well. And I realized quite soon on that I could help people, but I could help people on a much bigger scale if I kind of scaled up the therapy I was doing. So I started to create training courses. So I created training courses that originally I would run sort of on a Saturday morning in local hotels and things like that. And then I started to get invited to go into organizations and speak on all sorts of aspects of well-being. And that grew really quite considerably over the past sort of 8 years. And that now has become predominantly what Beam does is we create personal development and wellbeing training that we go into organizations all around the world, helping individuals, employees, managers, leaders to feel more resilient, more confident, healthier, happier, to manage their own wellbeing. So that's kind of what we do at the moment.
This isn't what you've always done, though, is it? Tell me about the career you had before Beam.
So I've got quite a varied background, really. So I did a degree in education and psychology, really loved that, and really loved the psychology element particularly. And my goal really when I left university was that I wanted to be a play therapist. I wanted to help children through the medium of play. And I did a play therapy course, but when I was 19, I'd bought my own home and I had a mortgage. And so being a play therapist at 21 was really challenging, really difficult to get into. And I just needed a job really, to help pay the bills. And so I got a job in a call center for a finance company. And within a few months, I got promoted into HR. And they sponsored me to do a postgrad in human resource management, which I really enjoyed and had quite a really exciting bit of career there because it was a company that was really fast growth. So I took on a lot of responsibility and I had a lot of opportunity to dip my toe into the water of all aspects of HR. And I worked for a managing director that I could only really describe as sort of a politically incorrect in those days. And unfortunately, he was supportive of me. He took me for lunch one day. And when we went for lunch, he said, Lianne, you've got a brilliant career here. Just don't get pregnant. And little did I know that actually at that lunch, I was pregnant. So when I found out that I was pregnant, I knew that this company, I was working sort of 14-hour days. I knew it wasn't the place that was going to support me to have the balance that I wanted to be able to be a mum as well. And so I left there when I had my daughter. And in my naivety, really, I thought, well, I'll kind of step out of my career for a year, maybe 2 years, but then I'll be able to go straight back into it. And of course, as any mums and parents know, that having a child isn't really just a year and then you go back to your normal life before. Yeah. And so I realized that actually going back to my career at that point wasn't going to be viable. I wanted to be at home with my daughter. And so for a while, I just did any job really that brought in a bit of money. I did things like telephone appointment making for a charity. I held candle parties. So you buy loads of candles and you try and sell them to your friends. Yeah. You name it, I did it to just try and bring a bit more money in. And as my daughter got a bit older, I thought again, naively, once she went to nursery, it would be a little bit easier. But obviously nursery was only half a day and I was still managing the childcare. So I decided that going back to HR was probably not very realistic. In those days, HR couldn't even be imagined to be something you could do from home. It was an office-based thing. You had to, be with the people. And so I retrained again, and I retrained in bookkeeping to begin with. So I did a few bookkeeping qualifications, and I thought, well, it doesn't really excite me, but I can at least do books whilst being at home with my daughter. And then I carried on studying, and I did the AAT qualification, accounting technician qualification. And I set up a bookkeeping and accountancy practice. And I hated it. I was really, really miserable. So I would regularly help my clients. My clients would come in and they would tell me all their problems, and I'd talk to them and help them deal with all sorts of issues. But putting numbers in boxes just wasn't for me. And that's quite an important part of being an accountant, really. And I really sort of lost myself for a good few years of doing what I thought was sensible rather than following anything that I was passionate about or felt excited about. And so ultimately, around 2010, I just made huge life decisions, and I left a relationship and I left my career, and I basically started again from scratch. And part of that journey of starting from scratch was me working out who I was and working out what I enjoyed. And I remembered that the thing I really enjoyed more than anything was psychology and helping people. And that was kind of always the path that I'd wanted to take. And that's what led me then to doing sort of holistic therapies, things like aromatherapy, Reiki, Indian head massage, that sort of thing. And I started a holistic therapy practice. And then I realized quite quickly that I don't really like touching strangers. I would rather talk to them than touch them. And so I would have people come in, and again, people just really wanted to talk and wanted to be heard and needed help with problems. So I started to qualify in more talking therapies. So things like emotional freedom technique, NLP, hypnotherapy, coaching. And started to kind of help people on a one-to-one basis that way. And then that is what led me really into thinking, actually, I can do this on a much bigger scale if I start to create courses to help lots of people at once rather than one person an hour.
It's interesting there how you've described your journey, Lianne. You seem to me to have shown a huge amount of self-awareness in terms of going into things for what at the time you thought were the right reasons, but quickly realizing that it wasn't for you and knowing why it wasn't for you, and then being honest with yourself as well. Would you say that that is a prerequisite for anybody thinking of starting their business or looking to scale it, is really being honest with yourself and tapping into what matters to you?
I think one of the challenges of sort of telling your story is that you summarize it, right? So from me telling that story of I went into HR, I went into accountancy, made a couple of changes, then went into psychology. That sounds kind of like I had a lot of self-awareness and realized what was and wasn't for me. But actually, in reality of it, I'm 45 next week. So that's kind of 25 years of self-awareness. So it wasn't an overnight thing. I spent, I would say, pretty much most of my 20s doing what I thought was sensible, doing what I thought was the right thing. So pleasing my parents, pleasing my partner, pleasing my daughter as well, even though she wasn't putting the demand on me, doing what I thought I should do as a good mum. And so there, I would say in particularly my 20s, my self-awareness was really quite low. It was only when I had this realization, and I often tell this story to people because lots of people have had this experience, but maybe for different reasons. But I created a life that from the outside looked really good. Self-employed, nice big house, nice car, holidays, all of that stuff. And so from the outside, everyone thought she's successful, she's doing well. And I just felt more and more disconnected from myself. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I just knew I was unhappy. And it's a really weird feeling when you're that unhappy, but you've created it. No one forced me to do it. You know, I had a nice life on paper, but I still wasn't happy. And I think the big turning point for me was realizing, and it was literally one day saying out loud, oh, I'm not happy. And that was, as I said it out loud, was the first time I'd ever allowed myself to think that. And I talk quite often about how, for me, particularly my 20s, I had this sort of mental checklist of doing what I thought I should do to be happy. You know, get the house, get the bigger house, get married, have a child, doing all of those things that I thought was expected of me. And when I reflect on that, that was mostly self-inflicted. It wasn't, you know, anyone putting that on me. And so self-awareness now is a huge part of who I am. But it took me a long time to ask myself what I wanted, to reflect on myself of what lights me up, what am I passionate about, what do I want to do. So when you summarize the journey, it seems like, oh, okay, there was a change and this happened and that. But when you're living that was kind of a 25-year journey, really.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Are there any shortcuts then to that self-awareness? I mean, you talk about it being a permanent feature now, really. What about women listening to this who might resonate with the earlier part of your journey and maybe accept that they're not quite 100% fulfilled in the work that they're doing? Are there any exercises or so on that you can recommend that women can do to try and tap into their true passion in a career and business sense?
Yeah, there's a lot. One thing that I would encourage everyone to do, actually, whether you're content in your work or you're not, is to regularly sort of check in with yourself and ask yourself, you know, why am I doing this? Because what happens so often, particularly when we kind of have done a career for a number of years, is we do it because we've always done it and we've lost our why. And motivation is highly connected to your why. You know, if all of a sudden, you know, there was a fire where I am right now, my motivation to get out of this room would be really strong. There would be a big why. But if there was nothing going on in this room and no reason to change, my motivation to get out of this room is going to be quite low because I don't have a strong why. And so what I find with my journey, and certainly lots of the people I work with and help, is that we make a decision perhaps in our 20s of who we're going to be and what we're going to do. And then we forget to keep connecting with that and ask ourselves, why am I still doing this? And so I know that the person I was in my 20s was a people pleaser who was trying to make everyone else happy. And so asking myself why just very rarely came into it. And so I think one of the most powerful things that we can do to begin with is work out why. Why do I do this job? Why do I live where I live? Why do I spend my Saturdays doing that? Why am I friends with that person? And just reconnect. The reason I think that's so powerful is because when you've got a why, things are worth fighting for. So if you know why you do your job, and if it's got a bigger meaning than just it pays the bills, then when you're going through a tough patch at work, you can stay connected to, that's okay, I know I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it. I believe in what I'm working towards. I love the people I work with. But if I am going through a tough patch and my reason is, well, it pays the bills, that becomes a lot tougher. It's not a big enough why for me. And if you're not massively financially motivated, you'd find the same thing. So working out why you're friends with someone, why you do that on a Saturday morning, why you choose to spend your money on that actually helps you be really passionate about the things that you are investing in, but also be able to disconnect from the things that you're doing just because you feel that you should. And I often say to clients and delegates, for me, should is a banned word. Should is one of the kind of most toxic words I can think of, because lots of us do things because we think we should, and should builds up a lot of guilt. You know, I'm not good enough. I should have already done it. And also a bit of resentment. I'm doing it because I should do it rather than I want to do it. So I guess going back to your question, the first thing really is to build that self-awareness, is to get to know yourself a bit more. What are you passionate about? Why are you doing the things that you do? Know your why will help you be motivated, whether it's your job, losing weight, exercising, being a parent. When you know why you want to do it, you're going to be more motivated to stay during those tough times.
That's interesting, because one of the things that we always advocate for small businesses with a business plan, for instance, is that it's never a one and done. So you don't write the business plan and shelve it and never look at it again. It's a living, breathing document that you need to keep updating. But I wonder how many people ever apply that to themselves, as you're saying, and ever revisit the decisions they made maybe even decades ago. Yeah. I want to move on to talk about the business growth that Beam has experienced. So you brought your husband Tom into the business a few years ago. Can you talk to us about what was the catalyst for expanding the business and bringing Tom on board?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was something that I would never have foreseen happening. So my husband is a qualified carpenter joiner, and for most of his career had been project managing building sites. So it wasn't a logical move to ever think that we would merge that and bring it together. But Beam was growing quite considerably, and I had reached a stage in the business which I had seen so often when I was in the accountancy world, where people build a business because they're really passionate about whatever it is they do. And then the business starts to gain momentum, and all of a sudden you're not doing the bit you're passionate about, you're running and managing a business instead. And Beam had got to the stage where it needed managing, so scheduling, invoicing, business development, all of that. But also, I wanted to continue to write courses and to train and to continue to be the kind of face of helping people. And I realized, because of my accountancy experience and seeing other businesses do that most of the time when I saw business owners become really sort of disengaged with their business, it was because they'd stopped doing what they loved. And the business had almost become burdensome because they were doing the bits they had to do, the sort of compliance bits, rather than the bits that lit them up. And so I knew that I didn't want to step away from training and writing. I knew that that wasn't going to excite me. And so I had quite a lot of clarity in thinking, well, then the only other option is I bring someone in to manage the business, so I continue to do the bits that I love, and then someone who can kind of oversee the business as a whole. And so I had that in my head for a while, and my husband was working on a building site for quite a few years, managing that project, and that was coming to an end. And he had already helped me quite a lot with project managing Beam, really. And then one day we were chatting and I said, why don't you come into the business and you run it, and I can still do what I love and what I'm passionate about. And we had quite a lot of conversations, because it's a big deal. It's a big deal to spend all of your time together. It's a big deal for me to let him into something that I'd created from nothing. You know, it's kind of my baby. And so we had a lot of conversations before it happened, and we sort of set quite a few ground rules without realizing we were doing that. So the first ground rule was that he would have his area of responsibility, and I wouldn't go in and say, no, we don't do it like that. This is mine. I would give him that freedom. And that was really important. We then realized once he came into the business that another ground rule we needed was cut-off time, because we found we were talking about it in the evenings and on the weekend. And, that's not particularly exciting and romantic. As much as we're passionate about the business, we wanted to still have our marriage outside of it. So we have a cut-off time where we won't talk about it. And if one of us does mention it, we're on the weekends, we're out and about and, did I tell you that I've got a meeting with that person? And then straight away we'll go, nope, we'll talk about it Monday. So we won't have that. And then the other ground rule that we set was that we would kind of give each other flexibility to grow. So I didn't expect Tom to come in and know everything about e-learning and well-being. I knew that he was a project manager. And so my expectations for him were, as well as taking over project managing the business, was for him to grow personally. So he's done a lot of personal training, lots of different courses, coaching, NLP, all sorts of different things that have helped him grow, but giving him the time and space to do that. And equally, he does that for me as well. So hopefully, he came on board 2019. So it's been 3 years now, and it's worked really well. And we've actually never had an argument over the business. So the ground rules seem to work.
Yeah, no, that sounds really impressive. And it's interesting because one of the things that we support businesses that come onto the NatWest Accelerator program with is identifying that you just can't do it all, and that at some point you need to acknowledge what your strengths are, but also what your weaknesses are and where the gaps are, and look to bring someone in or outsource or whatever. But that it is a huge strength to recognize that you can't do it all. And as I said in the introduction, we unfortunately see that female-led businesses tend to not reach the potential that male-led businesses would. And I do wonder if this might be part of the reason that women reach a certain point and would have to make a tough decision to move the business on. So it's brilliant to hear how you've gone about that. Lianne, I'd love to move on and talk to you before we finish up about well-being, because that is your raison d'etre. That is what Beam does, and that's what you specialise in. But you are a founder, you run the business. You've already alluded to needing strong boundaries in place to make sure that the business doesn't overtake your life.
Yeah.
How important is it for anybody setting up a business and running a business to put their well-being first?
I think it is the most important ground rule in any business, whether you're setting up to be an electrician, whether you're working in well-being, whether you're doing PR, whatever it is, the business is only ever going to be as strong as you as an individual. And the challenge that we have is that when we are entrepreneurial, we're excited, we're passionate, we find it hard to switch off, we find it hard to ask for help. Lots of us either don't like doing that or perhaps don't even know where to turn to ask for that help as well. And we also find it hard to be able to say, okay, I need a bit of a break. And I think one of the challenges that I've gone through personally, I've worked for myself for a long time, but I still sometimes, even now, have the mentality of, I can't finish work, it's only 3:00. I've got to do the 9 to 5. And I've worked really hard on that over the last few years of just being able to target the work I want to achieve for the week or the day, get that done, and then step away. No matter what the time is, to be able to do that is really important for my own well-being. And I think that from conversations I have with other business owners and people who come to me on a therapeutic basis, I think whether you're employed or self-employed, that's something lots of us have struggled with, particularly since the pandemic, because our lives have become a little bit blurry, a little bit messy, working from home, doing hybrid working. And so we put so much pressure on ourselves that we end up putting ourselves at the bottom of the pile. And I see it every single day. I see people every single day who say to me, the thing is, this is a really stressful time, but as soon as I can get through this period, then it'll be okay. Then I'll rest. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lies we tell to ourselves. I know I tell myself that lie. Once I've done this bit, then I'll take some downtime. But the problem is the goalposts always move. And when you're running your own business, particularly, there's that feeling of I can't take my foot off the gas because I'm responsible for all of it. So I'm responsible for other people then, you know? And so we just keep pushing and keep pushing. And eventually, if we do that, either our mental health or our physical health or both are going to suffer without a doubt. So our well-being really needs to be one of the principal things we consider as one of the key assets to our business. If I can look after myself, then I can manage my business. I can help other people. I can produce good work. If I'm running on sort of 40%, then I'm never going to put out my best work. So I'm going to struggle with it.
It's the old adage of putting your own oxygen mask on first, isn't it?
Definitely.
But it sounds obviously really, really sensible and kind of obvious when you put it in those terms. But how do you put that into practice? What are some tools and techniques that you can suggest that anybody who's feeling like that, who thinks, well, yeah, I see it in myself, but I'm struggling to do anything about it. What can they do?
The principal thing, I think, is something we've already touched upon, which is boundaries. It's making sure that we have proper boundaries in place. So boundaries for when your working day starts, boundaries for when your working day ends. I was delivering a session on managing boundaries yesterday for a company, and I talked to them about bees. So we all know the adage, right, that working like a busy bee. And we know that bees work pretty hard on this planet. You know, they're constantly on the go. But actually, most species of bees, if all of a sudden you put them in the dark, they drop to the ground. They stop flying, they stop working. And so a bee absolutely works really hard when it's daytime, when it's time for them to work. But the second that it goes dark, they go into rest mode. So a bee is either all on or all off. There's no in between. And I think one of the things that we do for our well-being that damages us the most is we stay in this state of constant standby. So I might be away from my desk at 5 o'clock. I might have shut down my computer and I might be sat with my family. But if I'm sat there and I'm thinking about what I've got to do tomorrow and the emails I've got to write, then I'm not all off. And so one of the first boundaries I would suggest putting in is to decide when you're all on and when you're all off and to work with that. So there's a brilliant book called Deep Work by someone called Cal Newport. And Cal Newport talks about this and talks about how actually our brains really run in 90-minute rhythms. So our brain is only optimally performing for about 90 minutes. And then after 90 minutes, we go into a sort of cognitive decline. So it's harder for us to remember things. Our reaction times are slower. So the brain just starts to get tired after 90 minutes of working. And so Cal Newport says that every 90 minutes we should be taking regular breaks. So instead of just pushing and pushing through, and that's supported by other research by someone called Sean Achor from Harvard, who talks about the importance of taking regular recovery breaks. And he calls them internal recovery. So taking a break every 90 minutes for about 5 minutes. And then external recovery, where we take a 60 to 90 minute break at the end of a mentally taxing period. And so one of the principal ways we can take care of ourselves is to be better at giving ourselves permission to take a break. And to know that actually all of the research says that when we take regular recovery breaks, we're more focused, we're more creative, we're more productive, and we have a better sense of health and well-being. There is no research I've ever come across to date that says if you just keep pushing on through, then it's okay, then you'll produce. No research suggests that. All of the research says we start to decline. And so recognizing that I can produce more when I take a break, which involves us having an honest conversation with ourselves, because that little voice in our head usually says, I haven't got time to take a break. But actually what the research says is you haven't got time not to, because if you don't take a break, eventually we start to reach that critical point of burnout, which we definitely don't want to do. So setting up boundaries is a huge topic, but the first critical boundary I would say is having time boundaries, of being able to step away, make sure that you're giving yourself that crucial break. Obviously, then there's digital boundaries, not being connected to our phone all the time. There's also the boundaries that we set up with people, emotional boundaries, not letting people take from us all the time and communicating what is and isn't okay. So I'd say that's the number one tool for managing your well-being when you're particularly running your own business, perhaps being a parent, care and responsibilities, all of those other hats that we have to wear.
That is hugely helpful advice. Thank you, Lianne. That is all we've got time for, but thank you for listening, and thank you so much to my guest, Lianne Weaver of Beam Development and Training. If you'd like to hear further episodes of Inspiring Women Wales, then please subscribe. To find out more about this podcast and how USW Exchange can connect your organisation to the skills, expertise and facilities at the University of South Wales, visit southwales.ac.uk/business. And for more on NatWest support for small businesses, search NatWest Business Services.